Hello, everyone. My name is Kristen Mills. Hi, for those who I can see. Welcome to Virtual VSE. I am your host for this evening. Thank you for being here virtually. Thank you for being in your living rooms and tuning in. Tonight we have Cesar Cornejo, who actually we were just speaking, is an alum. He was here as a resident in 2002 and also in 2006. Without further ado, I'm going to introduce Cesar. We have Cesar Cornejo, whose work explores the relationship between art, architecture, and society. He's influenced by having lived and worked in 4 different cultures: Peru, Japan, England, and the USA, and all have influenced his thinking and his working. He works in a number of different media. He is the founder of the project Puno Museum of Contemporary Art, which is an alternative museum model which places community at its center. I'm excited to hear more about that. Cesar has participated in exhibitions such as the London Art Fair in 2020, California Pacific Triennial 2017, the 12th Havana Biennial, art positions at Art Basel Miami 2011, and the Busan Biennial 2008. Cesar has received awards and residencies from Fulbright, Creative Capital, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Brown Foundation Fellows Program at Dora Maar House, which I believe is where you met Jody. Is that right?
Correct, yeah.
The Howard Foundation, the Sharp Walenta Studio Program, the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, Art Omai International Artist Residency, the British Council on the Ministry of Education of Japan, and the Vermont Studio Center. He received an MA and a PhD in Fine Arts from the Tokyo University of the Arts and a bachelor degree and professional license in architecture from the Ricardo Palma University in Lima, Peru. He's a senior lecturer at the Manchester School of Art of the Manchester Metropolitan University and is represented by a gallery at Cross Fine Art, also in the UK. We're speaking to Cesar right now, and he is in Manchester, England. So it is 1,000,000 o'clock for Cesar, and he's happy to stay up and talk to us. Cesar, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Kristen, for the wonderful presentation and for the invitation to be here, for all your hard work. I'd like to thank everyone first for being here as well. And I prepare a very short text to set up some sort of framework on which later, as I show my work, you might be able to make connections with what I read, and or ask if you think that there's not clarity in any aspect of it. So, with not further ado, I'll start reading. I was a resident artist at Vermont Studio Center twice, first in 2002 and later in 2006. And I'm very fond of my memories there. The people that I met there, the camaraderie among the participants, the interactions with the visiting artists like Pat Paslov, who later became my extended family and dear mentor during my time in New York, and all the people who I became friends with whom I keep relationships until today, were very meaningful to me during my first steps in the US. So when Kristen told me that she was interested in addressing the subject of what it means to be a citizen in America today, I felt that due to my history with Vermont Studio Center, it was an ideal place to address it. Because it was during that time, as I said, that I was living the journey of an immigrant and being blessed by meeting generous people who decided to trust me and value me and my work. Also think that it is a difficult question to answer, and in part because, as we have bluntly seen in the events from last week, there's not only one, but several definitions of what being an American citizen mean to several groups of people. Also should say that I don't agree with the politicians who responded to the events saying, this is not who we are, when I actually think that what they should have said is to acknowledge that this is actually who we are as a country. And so the real question that should have been asked then is if we want to live with it, or if we want to rather do something about it and change the situation. I arrived in the US in 2006. In 2013, I naturalized and became an American citizen and lived there until mid-2019. Which is when I officially left the US to come to the UK. And I did it as a result of several negative experiences, which made me come to the realization that I didn't have a future there, and that I could not do much from within to change it. And lastly, I didn't feel safe in living in Florida anymore. So I did what to many people may have seemed a crazy idea, which was to leave a tenured position and move to start again in the UK. Although to this day, I think it was the right decision for me to take. As I said before, I'm an American citizen and I'm not planning to renounce my citizenship. Although I am constantly negotiating my role as such from here, and especially as an artist. When I left Peru 24 years ago, I didn't stop being Peruvian. Although as I spent more time abroad, every time I went back to visit my family, my relationship with it had started to shift. And I think it is how I am feeling about having moved as well out from the US. And especially, yeah, having lived in Florida, where I felt definitely I didn't belong to anymore. Now, I know living abroad, I don't want to be defined by the expectations of what being an American citizen might bring. And what I often find myself doing things in the American way, let's say, I'm assuming my new role with a sense of responsibility, or trying to do so towards it, especially as a person who has the privilege of showing his work internationally and speaking platforms like this one. Also, it seems to me that for someone to understand this question in its full dimension, first has to awaken to the American dream, or from the American dream, as we all abruptly did last year with the devastation that the pandemic brought on us, and with last week's events again. Maybe the main lesson has been that we are not too different from other countries that we often criticize. And maybe we could start changing our attitude and start embracing the world beyond its geographical borders or geopolitical borders. With that said, through my work, which focuses on the relationships between art, architecture, and society, having been influenced by having lived in and worked in different cultures, as Kristen mentioned, I have intuitively and organically explored the subject of what it means to be a citizen of one country, in contrast with what it means to be a citizen of multiple ones. With that said, I'd like to start showing what my work is, and as I said, I welcome questions whenever they come. So I'll share my screen now. Great. Okay, so yes, as I mentioned, I not only have the question about what it means to be an American citizen or a Peruvian citizen or someone who maybe has a broader sense of citizenship, also about what is the role of artists today in the circumstances that we're going through. And so it's a responsibility that I feel we have as artists to use our creativity, our way of seeing, to influence the surrounding reality, and if possible, improve it as well. Growing up in Peru, I was exposed to very contrasting realities. This photo, I think, synthesizes how different realities can be in Peru. And this is only Lima, where on the left you have an affluent neighborhood, Miraflores, and on the right, sorry, you have Shantytown, which is a place where people from the countryside normally would arrive to live when they first move into the capital. My childhood developed in actually more what is the left side. I had the luck to be raised in a neighborhood which was nice and comfortable, but on the other hand, also, my father had a business in the center of Lima, which had been his business forever. And when Lima started decaying and getting terrorized by migration, he didn't want to move. He was just about to retire. And of course, he thought that would be a great thing for me to learn the business of, he was an antiques dealer, to learn the business of antiques by going with him at work. So while my friends were playing in this nice kind of environment during the holidays, I was in this kind of environment with him, learning or hating to be an antiques dealer. So I grew up very much between both realities, I would say. And because of that, my sense, I think, and my aesthetics as artists have been always leaning towards places that gather those kinds of conditions, like the museum that Kristen mentioned before. It takes place in low-income areas, for instance. So during my bringing in Peru, and later when I was at the university already, there were some really rough years that we struggled with. Very, very nasty war brought up by terrorists who were trying to take the control of the country. So it was devastating. More than 60,000 people died during the years between 1980 and 1992. And scenes like these were very common. Although as a young architect, at that time I was still a student of architecture, what seemed to be the most reasonable thing was to play in an underground band where we could shout and make noise and rebel against what we thought was the status quo and the system and everything that happened around us. So as you see, because I haven't changed any, I know, at all, this is me here. I'm sure you recognize me there with a lot of hair. And that, from there, I'd like to bring us 22 years forward to the project that has already been mentioned twice, the Puno Museum of Contemporary Art, which is a project that combines elements of architecture, sculpture, and economy. And where it takes place in this place called Puno, which is famous because it is where the Titicaca Lake is, which the Titicaca Lake, maybe you know, is the highest navigable lake in the world. And it's a city that's at 4,000 meters over the sea level. So air is really thin there, and it's the second poorest area in the country, where you have neighborhoods where are often left unfinished like this because of lack of finances, or people argue that it's because of paying less taxes in this way. But from my surveys, there is actually the former, the reason why they don't finish this, because of lack of resources to do so. The city has been changing since I started working there, but it still very much remains under the on the poor side, let's say, of the economy in Peru. And also, this project was a product of the fact that in Peru there was not a museum of contemporary art. And that year, I created a project in 2007, and there was only this project was left unfinished to create a museum. Now it is finished and it's actually working, the Museum of Contemporary Art of Lima. But at that time it wasn't. So I came up with an idea of creating some kind of museum that, instead of using models from first world countries, would use our resources, what we have in Latin America, to create a museum, and in the process of making that museum, also address the issues that we struggle with in Latin America. So basically what I do with this museum is I offer people in low-income areas to make construction work in their homes for free, with the condition that in exchange they allow us to exhibit art in those repaired spaces for a period of time, right? And the art that is shown is not my art, it's art by guest artists. So, and the artists should work with the owners of the house. So there's that idea as well of collaboration and integrating the voice of the hosts in the work. So it's the whole idea of integrating the community and the art system. And this is how it would work. This is one of the first sketches I did, where you have, several houses where the museum takes place. And so people can walk from house to house, and the streets become the corridors of the museum, let's say. This was the first experiment I did, actually. First on the left, the first show, very rudimentary, very simple. On the right side, 2 years later, when the house or the room was already being habited, and you see all the furniture already of people using the room. I have done other projects where I have used alternative ways of showing, like I used scaffolding, like here, wrapped it in aluminum foil to give it kind of a look of Guggenheim Bilbao, let's say, architecture, and invited a couple of artists actually, Donna Wanka and Roy Minten, to make this installation, which they make using scarves from the black market there. And then after, they did performances with the owners of the house as well. So this, in a way, and going back to the subject of citizenship, I mean, it may depend really how we see it or where we come from. And this is something this concept, which I'm going to show now, I became aware actually after I had started working on the project, but I saw, I mean, I knew about it, but I never thought about it in relation to my project, but I saw the connections afterwards. And so this concept is inherent from the Andes, from the area where I'm developing this project, or this project started. And it's basically an idea that seeks the benefit of the community over the individual, right? And it's something that's really intrinsic in these communities in the Andes, in the mountains, where people would exchange favors or things. And there's this very strong sense of unity in the community. So there are these three different models, different models where a whole group will help another group, or a group maybe is going to help a family, or a group may help an individual as well, right? So all those things somehow are part or happening in this concept of the museum, and it might have been influenced by my experience, as I said, growing up seeing those two realities as well, as I mentioned, that made me develop empathy for people who lived in these places. I have later presented these ideas in workshops, like this one, for instance, was in Miami a couple of years ago at the Creative Time Summit, where I brought students from the university I was teaching then in Florida to help me. And I integrated, I created some objects for them to play and create models, three-dimensional models that address these concepts. But the project itself has then fed from these ideas of Indian reciprocity, almost without knowing. But in a way, that's also why I think people from this area has embraced it so naturally, because there's always that feeling of understanding that they have when I explain the idea. Now going back from this project to my beginnings in art, I was also very influenced by this professor whose name was Carlos Galarza Aguilar. He was from a town called Aco in the mountains of Peru. And he tried to create or educate a new generation of architects. I was an architecture student then, taking sculpture as a course, to come up with an identity to create a Peruvian architecture, which was based on the Incas, architecture of stone or that kind of aesthetic. I have to say, never so keen on that. But certainly his encouragement to integrate architecture and sculpture is something that really found a root on me. And then after, I've been also influenced by works of artists like Frederick Kessler, or of films as well. I mean, one on top is film director Armando Robles Godoy from Peru. He already passed away, but was very influential in his time. Or more related to the German expressionist, this film you may know is the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, where all these scenographies are tilted and with different angles, or the kind of ambience that Tarkovsky builds in his movies as well, for instance, something that really intrigues me, and I have attempted more than once to recreate in my work. So while I have these strong ideas about society and identity and citizenship, I also am an artist, and I want certain aesthetic results. I want to achieve certain things aesthetically as well, or have certain impact, or communicate emotions. So this is where I find inspiration, as well as in books, etc. So these are some early works I made in Peru and in Japan. I have learned the vocabulary of sculpture for a very long time. I was trained as an architect initially, and then I went to Japan not knowing anything, basically. I only knew how to cast cement and plaster, very rudimentary. And so there, really, I tried to invest myself into learning traditional techniques, which I felt was a big gap that my education as an artist had, because I had a more traditional idea of sculpture at that time. So I started learning terracotta and started learning bronze casting, stone carving, And all that definitely has helped me, and laminating wood as well. That's something actually that Vermont had a big influence on developing my technique. And so, but all that, what I'm trying to say is that has influenced very much the work I've done later as, let's say, contemporary artist, where I borrow from this repertoire of techniques and use them as a foundation to be able to use basically whatever technique I want, not necessarily within this, but any other technique applying, let's say, the same systems to make the works, and sometimes also making my own techniques. And this piece, for instance, as I mentioned, when I talked about laminated wood just now, that Vermont had a big influence. It was because I was making or had plans to make this piece when I was still a PhD student in Japan. And I had not learned the laminated technique there, how to laminate wood. But I arrived, and I just had the residency invitation for 2002, which was winter in February. And I arrived with my drawing, which I had drawn by hand, of this installation. And one of the resident artists there, his name was Gary, he saw my drawing and he was impressed by that, because computers were already starting to take over and people were forgetting how to draw these perspectives. And so he was really interested in seeing my drawing. And then I learned that he actually was an expert in woodworking. And he generously started teaching me how to bend laminate wood and make molds. And that is something that generosity is something that I had very seldomly encountered. And I found it there at Vermont. And it was really, well, I was not moving. I didn't have plans to move into the US at that time. But certainly that kind of welcoming to a foreigner is something that I encountered has really been very influential in my career at certain points. I mean, and I would have probably not made this piece if it had not been because I went to Vermont when I did. So that piece later evolved into installation that was presented in different places, and also my work from there I started changing. And one of the elements when I left Japan and moved to the UK, one of the elements that and this was back in 2004. One of the elements that definitely influenced my work was to work in education. I did a lot of projects in education, not as teacher, but as artists who would be brought to school with other artists to come up with ideas, to use materials and processes to get students to understand the curricula in alternative ways, right? So for instance, you see here that I brought Velcro and I covered whole walls with Velcro, and the students were sticking their heads and their feet or trying to climb like Spider-Man here. Or I brought, I created this in a slope that the school had, another school had. I created this soft cushion with plastic and foam. And that was a school where they had all these political problems within, faculty and students and stuff. So they started all playing together and rolling and laughing and created that kind of situation. Or as well here, I brought color eyes, and people also had a great afternoon just playing with the eyes, and etc. Or here, for instance, with toilet paper. Some installations were really expensive, some others were really cheap, but for me it was a very transformative experience. And through that, really, my work also changed. And this, for instance, was a key piece I was asked to make for the Arts Council of England and an organization called the Art House, where I had to use elements from the curricula and schools came and interacted with the piece. And later, one of the schools wanted the piece installed in the grounds. And so I said, well, why to bring the piece as it is? If the school is much smaller than the original place where this was installed. This was originally installed in a museum in the countryside, which had very large gardens. So I decided to dismantle the piece and give the students the opportunity to redesign it with maquettes I gave them to make designs themselves. So these were designs made by students, who were probably at the time 10 years old or 9-year-old, right? And these were at the end large sculptures that we built for them, following their designs, that were installed in the garden, so which made a lot more sense than me bringing the original sculpture. So my work, because of that, definitely changed. And then later I started exploring as well again, using some of the similar techniques, other ideas I had. In this one, in regarding painting and sculpture and public space, right? How can placing these objects that are completely out of context in a public space can change the way that we perceive them in long term, right? Or everyday situations. What would they do to that kind of situation if we see this once in the market, and then we probably will never think about the cashier in the same way, right? Or like McDonald's here, right? So that that kind of work became some sort of link between my early work, let's say making laminated plywood or stone carving or bronze, and more, let's say, socially engaged, which I wouldn't necessarily call it such, but more into the world, into the real world, or feeding from the real world. And this piece probably is the one where actually this big change happened in the most definitive way. And this was an installation I made for a biennial in Venezuela in 2004. And I was invited to make a labyrinth, a wooden piece, like the ones I showed you before, from laminated wood. And I sent them designs. I sent them like 4 designs. And they always rejected them. They said, well, we don't have money, we don't have resources, this or that. And then after sending 4 designs, I thought, well, you know, I'm being stupid. I mean, I know that they can't build these kind of things. Why am I keeping doing that? And I think that's something that we have, in a way, been forced, because of this situation that we're going through now, make radical decisions or radical changes. For me, that was necessary at the time. I need to make a radical change if I wanted to be in that show. Because if I had not been able to deliver something that they could make, I was probably going to be taken out of the show. So I thought, well, I mean, I had a sincere interest in education. So I thought, why don't I just bring that into my work in a way that's really, articulated with my interest in architecture and society. So I made this proposal. It was approved. It was easy to build compared to the wooden pieces I was proposing initially, and became, for me, a major experience. And yet I applied all this experience I had from working in marble and bronze, etc., into making this piece as well. Why? Because, for instance, these encounters had to be perfect to create the illusion of actually the chairs going across the walls. So that level of detail is something that, if I had not worked in bronze and marble and these art techniques, I really would have not being able to resolve. There are all the views here. And I also translated that same concept to this installation, which was part of a show called A Private Matter that I showed in Peru, presented in Peru. And yet again, these pieces, in a way, this one addresses definitely what I felt was my responsibility as well as a citizen to say something about education. And in contrast to this, which I felt my responsibility to myself to be open about issues of communication within the family or within society. And in particular, this was based on my family, because all the furniture that I used in this installation was from my own family's home in Peru. And this was a hospital bed, for instance, that belonged to a hospital where my father had been interned. He was really ill, and which has become also very relevant today, I think, this kind of image, unfortunately. And this is a view of the whole installation. And I used my ideas and theories, let's say, as an architect, to accommodate this installation in a way that the pieces would guide you through the space intuitively. So when you walk inside the space, you didn't see one piece, or you didn't see the whole piece, you saw just one, and then you started discovering the rest, right? And when you got here to the end, is that you could see all the pieces at once. So, and later, well, so also I made this piece actually parallel to the show, where I made a memorial for 9 students and 1 professor from the National University of Education who had been kidnapped and killed by the Peruvian army in 1992, when I was still living in Peru. For me, those images of students being killed by army and police were really were devastating for me. I mean, I was really outraged to see these things happening around me, and I could have been me as well. I mean, you were never sure when you went out of your house if by accident something was going to happen near you, like a bomb would explode near you, and a policeman would find you and would think that you were the person who did it, or even he would not care, and just to take revenge on someone, he would put you in the trunk of his car, and then 2 hours later, you would appear dead somewhere else. And that happened so many times, and I saw it so many times. So I felt really the necessity to say something about this. When I was still in Peru, and this happened, I actually did work in a project to do a memorial for these victims, but working for a sculpture. It was not my own work. It was a project that I was helping as an architect. And because of that project, I met with the relatives of these victims to gather, feedback and run ideas with them. But later, when I went back in 2005 as an artist myself, I wanted to do this project, and I connected with them again. And this is one of the tombs, clandestine tombs where the bodies were found in the outskirts of Lima. So when I went back to Lima, 2005, I contacted them again. I went to the university, and I found that they had these workshops where they made flowers. So I thought, let's use that to create an installation. I didn't know yet what it would become. And then later, the flowers, instead of being made of cloth, which is what they used for making them for, they made these flowers for weddings. That's what they did in this kind of workshops. They made wedding arrangements and stuff like that. And when I went back, I said, well, why don't we make the flowers black? And they suggested, why don't we use paper? And then that from there was a matter of managing to make 60,000 flowers in the period of time that we had, which was not very long. And so the very big part of the university and a whole school within the university were involved in making this happen. In the end, this is what it became. It became an installation of 60,000 flowers with 9 desks that belonged to the university and that were likely had been used during the time when that killing happened, and 1 professor's desk, right? So the flowers had kind of overgrown this classroom to create this very dark scenario. And I have to say, like, very few times have happened that this is an installation where actually people cried when they saw it, and sometimes art has that capacity to communicate something so deep that there is no need for words to cause some sort of emotional reaction. And I was really stricken by that, because I heard that several people have experienced that when the gallery would tell me, like, oh, I came and there was this person crying. And so I don't know how that happened, but it was a very intense process and pushed me to my limits to make this, because in every aspect I was really pushed, but it was really satisfying as well to see the result. There's some details. And then later I've done other pieces where I explore relationship. I will not talk about every work because it would take too long, but other pieces where I explore also relationship between society and the individual. This is the Queen's Library. I mean, they used to have a gallery where projects of this kind would be developed. And or this, for instance, was an installation or a performance piece, sorry, that I made in Artomai residency in upstate New York, where I became a sculptor for a couple of hours during the open studios. So I engaged with visitors. They gave me water, sometimes tried food, and we talked about public art during my time there. Or for instance, this, which has an interpretation of a poem, again, unfortunately relevant today because of what's going on. It's called Masa, where I was reading this poem, which actually is about hope. And I was being carried by along 14th Street by 8 people who were unemployed at that time, which this was 2009. And we were going through some of the worst time of the financial crisis then. And so there were lots of people unemployed. And so I recruited them, and they carry me while I was reciting this poem. Or projects like this, which are more specific to South America. This was for Chile, and I was part of a team, although I was responsible for the design of the piece, interpreting the feedback of the team, which was made of curators, anthropologists, and artists as well. So we were 4 people in the team. And this represented the relationship between Chile, Bolivia, and Peru. I mean, we had a war between the 3 countries over 100 years ago, and still has not been resolved completely. The outcome of that still causes tension between the 3 countries. So this, in a way, represented that fracture between the 3 countries, and the llama as a symbol of them as well. And this is a team. This we were curator Gustavo Buntix, anthropologist, Elliot Tupac here, an artist. I can't remember his name right now. It's going to come in a minute. And myself here. These are all works that I made exploring against similar ideas. It's called Shanti, exploring the combination of aspects of pre-Hispanic culture and shanty towns and architecture, and also mass graves. Unfortunately, scenarios that are too familiar to us. And this piece also, I mean, it's really something that is aimed to be much larger, that compares basically shanty towns as these tombs, basically, right? Which in a way are social, can be considered social tombs. I've done these other works as well, exploring the idea of trepanation, or works that explore materials like this, tribal stutes. This one's called studs farm. Studs, like the dividers that are used in drywall walls. I made it as a critique to developments in my university, my former institution in Florida, where they were building Publix store within the university campus, when Publix is the only store in Florida who had not acknowledged the rights of the tomato farmers by raising 1 cent the price of the tomato in the markets. And so I was conflicted by that, and I made this piece raising awareness about the values that we were teaching students by inviting this company there. And this was the photo that went there with that sculpture, which in a way represents comes from the site as well, but there are the colors of the Mexican flag, which many of the farmers are from Mexico, farmers from these tomato farms. And going back to Puno MoCA, the project, that museum project that I showed before, it has had also, apart from the community installations, it has also had this kind of manifestation through installations, where I again become an architect to create experiences where people can learn about the project in a more intuitive way. I mean, so they learn by walking and feeling the space and looking at the images and reading the texts. But for me, it's very important that they have that experience of going or climbing the stairs and finding, discovering things in the space. So these are different installations made for the project. I also, Puno MoCA has become a sponsor for shows, like this was a show in New York of artists Anne Hamilton and Andrew Deutsch, and this was curated by Jake Dellinger, who is a curator based in Florida, a very good friend of mine. And so Puno MoCA became a sponsor of this, and took place in Cuchifritos, a gallery in the Lower East Side Market, which I hope still exists. I hope there were some projects to redevelop that area, which was a great space. And Felicity Hogan was the director at that time of the gallery. She helped us a lot as well. And these also, for instance, are projects of for installations where I kind of create versions of small museums within the museum, where I show the concept of the Puno MoCA Museum. By coincidence, the guard here that you see in this photo, she's from Peru as well. And we found out after I had been invited to be part of this show. So she was really invested in installation and following. And so I also included the work of an artist from Puno, who has been a collaborator from with Puno MoCA, and a piece from the collection of piece of the collection of the Museum of Pre-Hispanic Ceramics. They have a large collection of pre-Hispanic ceramics in this museum, which is the Orlando Museum of Art. Some views, again, more installations like this one. It's called Amaru, was made 2016 in Peru at the museum, Contemporary Art Museum in Lima. That museum that I showed you didn't have a roof yet, was still being developed. This is that museum. So I ended up showing in that museum, my own museum, and creating, again, reinterpretations of all installations I made, but with new settings, with new elements, trying to kind of enrich the experience. And so, for instance, this put together two different projects that I have done in the past. And they were connected through this wall. And Amaru means snake in Quechua, which is a native language in the Andes. So this wall, the curved wall, represented somehow the snake. And this was one of those projects I mentioned, those two projects. This was a project I did in a house, in a house which was going to be remodeled, completely remodeled. And I worked with the gallery I worked with at that time. I invited artists to do installations in the house that was going to be remodeled. So when I arrived, most of the space has already been taken, but this one, which was a room of the custodian, which I thought was the most interesting, had been left. So I offered to make a version of Puno MoCA inside the room. So he became a partner of the project, and we made a gallery there. And this is a photo of the work of the cloth as he had it hung in the wall initially. We made a closet for him in the room, and instead of the cloth, we hung a painting with the painting of the cloth as it had been originally on that wall, hung on that wall. So I have made variations of this project where I have a larger project where I would exhibit work in abandoned security boxes that are found across Lima, because, as I said, of the terrorist years in Peru, we had lots of security, but because the situation now has improved, many of those have been abandoned. So I proposed to use those as exhibition spaces, and that's something still in development. And this is a project I did, again, for Puno MoCA in Havana for the Havana Biennial in 2015, which I think has been probably the most successful intervention so far. This is a house of the family, Martin Chinique, the house of Martin Chinique. That's how it's called, although they are now the descendants of the family. This is the grandmother of the family. And this is Maritza, she's a mother, she's a granddaughter. And so the family who lives there now is Otero, and they are descendants or related to the original Martin Chinique. And this is the state of the house when I arrived. This was the state of the house. I paid to have it repaired. The family got involved in painting, choosing colors, making all the needed repairs. And I learned also that the family had owned in the past boats that were used to take people across the bay in Havana. So I decided to make something that made reference to that while also showing that this was a museum. So I came up with this proposal. And later, of course, was a nightmare to produce it, because when I made the drawing, I didn't know how I was going to make it. And so I used ship building techniques, and created this in Tampa, which is where I was based in, at the University of South Florida. And this is how it looked at the end, which is, I think, close enough to the original design. And the family was a wonderful partner. They were wonderful partners. During the exhibition, they stayed there welcoming visitors. They made their lives around this somehow. And this is the house before and after. We remain friends to this day. I just talked to the mother a week ago or so. That's, I think, as important as doing this kind of projects. How do you remain, what kind of relationship you build with the family afterwards? They continue making improvements in the house on their own, which is amazing to me as well, and feel that maybe I have helped for that to happen. And this is finally the house after the installation was taken down. I also paid to have the facade painted to the color that they chose. These are all installations. Again, this was, I think, made used for the advertisement. And they represent, again, Puno, but also they are more broadly about sculpture. My interest in sculpture, using recycled materials or making statements about society or the instability of society. And these are also sculptures that relate or try to represent the project. So I, as an artist, as I understand, as an artist who has been to Vermont and or residences, I like to make things, and there's nothing wrong with that. And the work can also address social issues. So in that sense, the work is, in a way, taking some responsibility as well in that regard. But I also enjoy working with community, right? I mean, sometimes it's hard to do everything at the same time, especially in circumstances like the ones we are living today. But we have to be flexible and adapt our work to the circumstances. More recently, I've been painting as well. These are drywall paintings addressing the drywall workers as artists as well. And so these are actual drywall panels that I've taken photos of in different places in Peru, England, the United States. And then this is, I want to end with this one. This is a work, actually two more, I think, just these are the last works. Installation I made, presented in London early last year, almost a year ago now. And we're again exploring these ideas, but also giving them form. And again, the idea of Puno MoCA coming back. And what I like to have to happen next year with this Fulbright grant that Kristen mentioned I received is to make a larger installation in Puno, hopefully. I don't know if these are going to be necessarily the shapes, but I would like definitely to make a large project in Puno where several houses would be involved, like the original idea, and have people walking from house to house and make this a reality. Thank you again for listening and for your interest, and appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Cesar. That is amazing. That is a lot. So good. I've made it, everyone, so that if you want to unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask a question, or you can throw it in the chat and I'll read it out loud. It's up to you. But I feel like I have, I feel like I have a lot of questions myself, but I'm going to give it a moment if anyone wants to jump in.
I'd like to ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Cesar. It's Linda Norris, Oldsmore.
Hey, Linda, how are you doing? Nice to see
you.
Thank you for coming.
It's good to see you. I'm really interested in your thoughts of, I love the aspect of the social justice, the social aspect, and how connected you feel to communities, and you put that into your art. With everything that's going on in this past year with COVID and with everything that's going on here in the United States, do you think that that is going to make some way into a future installation?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. I saw your name, but I didn't recognize.
I changed it to Kalinda.
Right. Yeah. Linda is, of course, good to see you. I mean, I had a pleasure to work with Linda when I was working in Florida. She works at the City Council of Osborne and Oldsmar, pardon me. And I'm forgetting now after so long. And she made this amazing project where she invited students from my class to submit public art proposals, which were in the end implemented, one of them. And that was an amazing, I think, legacy for the community and for the students, principally. And so thank you again for being here. And yeah, your question, I think, is very relevant. And I don't have necessarily a definitive answer. I mean, as artists, and I think every person will agree, and every person works in the same way, I think, is influenced by what happens around us. And so it might be, yes, that, and might be that the work I'm making now is already being influenced somehow by what we're looking, what's happening around us. But intentionally trying to make work about it is something that I would like to avoid if possible, because it can become too literal, and I, in that regard, much rather volunteer doing some work that I know is going to help people than trying to, as an artist, pretend that, oh, I'm doing this with meaning and I'm gonna, with my work, you know, make this thing happen. Unless it comes from a real place where I feel I need to make this, like I felt when I make this flowers installation that you're looking now on the screen. I will hesitate to make anything, but certainly there's so much that has happened that someone would have to be really blind, deaf, and not be affected by it, and probably later on see those effects in the work as well. So I am as clear as I can be at this point. Right. It's a process. The art process is something I rather keep, even to me, even though I teach and I try to be clear in my teaching. I also acknowledge that there are aspects of art that should not be, let's say, accessible in the way that other majors or areas are expected to be.
Right.
That's the only thing that can guarantee surprise, which is, I think, what art should always be able to achieve: surprise us.
Right.
Well,
I'd like to just end with just letting the other viewers know that Cesar helped us with the very first public art installation in the city of Oldsmar, in the history of the city of Oldsmar. And now you'll be very proud to know, Cesar, that you can't go to any realtor in Oldsmar that does not use a photograph of that bandshell and the murals in selling houses in Oldsmar. So it's really nice that it was a fight to get it done, and it took a long time, but it's beautiful. And now there's pictures of it all over the place. So it's good to see.
I'm so proud for you. I mean, it was your work, Linda. I was just.
No, it was ours. Couldn't have done it without you.
Thank you.
Cesar, there are a couple questions in the chat. Can I read some of them to you?
Please, yes.
Okay. What happens to the materials after the installations have been taken down?
For instance, in Havana, which probably is where the question is more relevant, because that's where the materials were more evident. Yeah, I had the same question. When I first started making this piece, I didn't know. Actually, when I explored that if I could make the piece in Havana, I found that they didn't have any of the materials that I needed. So I had to make everything in the US and ship it, which was not easy because there are all these restrictions between both countries because of the embargo. So once the materials got there, I brought extra because I needed to make scaffoldings and things, or in case things didn't work, I needed to have some extra. I realized the value that those things had there for the families, for the people who had helped. So I left the materials that I didn't use for them to use if they wanted. So it became like a donation, which was really precious, I think, considering that they don't have access to those materials normally. So before I had left, they had already made a ladder because they needed to build a new ladder. The installation itself is being kept, as I was told, for future use, possibly in another exhibition. So in that regard, the piece is going to be recycled, and in a way, hopefully in a more environmentally friendly way. But it's it has become in a way, the piece became in a way a horse of Troy, where I used the opportunity to make the museum to bring all this influx of resources that could help the people beyond the project. And I have the same intention for when I make this large project in Puno, where I will try to gather resources that could be useful for them as well. I was thinking, for instance, in bringing some solar panels and technology that could be used or be useful. Instead of having necessarily all, aluminum, maybe there could be solar panels, and have them benefit from that, right? That they could use them later, they can recycle them, could be used in many different houses. So that's a definitive important subject to address when I made these projects.
Cool. Follow-up question to that. How much administrative / outreach work is involved in the Puno MoCA for identifying sites, getting people on board, etc.? Is that something you handle yourself as the artist, or do you need a whole team?
I have partners in Puno. I mean, now I have, I think, one left there because most have moved to different places, and that's how reality is. People have to keep moving to find opportunities, etc. And if but I mean, I am always going, when I go back to Puno, I always go to the same places and try to keep those relationships alive. And they still remember me, and they think, oh, this is the guy who always comes with the idea of the museum, right? And I just come, I tell them, please, it's true, believe me, I'm just still trying to find the resources to do this and the opportunity or the time. So it's in some ways, it's a one person's endeavor. I do very much of the legwork myself. I have become somehow the face of the museum, but my goal is that the museum is taken over by the community, and I take a step back, right, so I can live it. But for that to happen, I have to have an infrastructure, I have to have the resources for it to just go along, which I also acknowledge that is extremely hard, because when it comes to having support from the government in Peru, you cannot take the risk of getting involved with the government, because the government is extremely corrupted. And in Puno in particular, I think most of the presidents of that region go to jail after they finish their term. So I would not like to get involved with anyone who's going to end up in jail and later myself be accused of having misused funds or whatever because someone else did. Mm-hmm. So I rather have very little and do very little when I can than trying to do something large and then get robbed and destroy the project because of that, right? The legacy of the project. So it's a very delicate, depends on the country as well. In Havana, for instance, the biennial was wonderful because they became the organizer, and they did make everything much easier and faster. And when things were really tough, they were the ones who were really there to support and provide the resources that I needed to get the project done. So but again, and Cuba, of course, has all these issues as well of liberty and human rights that we all know of. So it's complicated. I did, for instance, I was advised in Cuba in the interviews not to mention the story of the boats being taken, because the boats that the family used to own were expropriated by the government, the Cuban government, when the revolution happened. So when they came to interview me, they asked me, don't use that word, expropriation. Use, where repurposed, right? Which is a much gentler way of saying it, right? So, but again, I was able to write a little bit of that in the text that received you when you walked into the installation. And again, the piece became, in a way, a Troy of Horse in that regard, where, a Horse of Troy, where it was a medium to bring materials and resources and help a family, and hopefully that can have a multiplying effect as well in the community. So it really depends what is a place. I wish, I had a team working with me, but of course that requires as well money, and sometimes grants are not that easy to find for this kind of project. But and of course, while I've been doing this project, I have given up my practice for years sometimes to dedicate to that project. And so it's a very hard thing to negotiate, because I also am an artist, and I need to make work as well. I mean, not only because of my professional profile, but as a person, as an individual, I need to produce. And so I think I'm arriving now to some sort of balance. I think the model from now on is going to be to work with already established festivals or biennials, and that could take care of all the the big organizational aspect of it, and me do the art piece or the relation with the community directly. But they would be the ones organized, right? And so that's what I'm planning now for the future.
That's a lot. Somebody asked, do you use mathematics in the creation of your works? I noticed a lot of interesting curves in geometry and imagine you've studied some as an architect.
Yes, actually, I enjoy that part a lot. And that's apart from me being an artist, I also think myself as a scientist. So sometimes I don't know how to make pieces and I come up with a process. Like for instance, to define those curves, I made it first as a maquette and then as a model, downscale model. But I had to translate that into large, a large piece in a way that actually was close to the original. So I had to create this geometric system of approximations to make that possible, as well as with the structure. I had to create this model of the structure that was calculated all the angles that the pieces would have. And but it's a trial failure process. I fail a lot in what I do, and I go back to it. I do it again better. And so it's a process that takes years sometimes, and a matter of learning from the mistakes. And but it's something I really enjoy, and that's I wear different hats when I make this kind of projects. I am an artist when I make the proposals and come up with ideas, and then I switch to being an architect, an engineer, when I design how this is going to be built, right? And where also there's creativity there, and I honestly think that engineers are artists too, or an accountant is an artist too. I mean, depending how they use their tools, right? I think that's really what a concept that's going to be more extending more in the future, into the future, how we can all be artists, and I think artists will have a much more impactful role in society once we all accept that. But yeah, there is definitely that part of mathematics in my work.
All right, here's another one. After you've designed the structures you described as museums within museums, do you build them yourself or do you have contractors build them?
Sometimes, like in Peru, that Amaru that I show you now if I have it here. I'll go as fast as I can. Well, the one that had the snake wall, that, for instance, I hired someone to make it. And I made all because it was too large, this one here. Sometimes the piece is just too large for me to make on my own, right? And you have to accept that. So I hired, or the museum hired, a builder who I know very well. He's a good friend of mine, to build this, and he has a team. But I had to be there every day to make sure that they did things in the way that they were supposed to be done, because they also can interpret things in a different way, which they were. Every time I step away, they were doing things in a different way. And I had to, so I ended up being there every day, directing the installation to make sure that things were as they should be. But it was, and we made it, I also had to make decisions on site, which were really important sometimes. And there are other pieces where, the one in Havana, there was no budget, for example, right? This that you have seen at the end. And sorry if I'm making you dizzy with this. There was no budget for this, right? So that until now, I mean, there's because of the embargo. Also, my former university was very generous with grants for research, but because this project was for Cuba, they would not fund it. They would not give me any money for it. My gallery in Peru had initially offered me an amount of money to make this, generous amount of money. In the end, they gave me 1/10 of it, which was enough maybe just to pay for the stay and the ticket. But going back to my introduction of the time I lived in Japan, where I learned to make all these different things myself, I went back to that. And actually, thanks to knowing how to build stuff, is that I was able to build this myself. It took me a lot of time. I had to spend endless days and nights working under the sun or late until 3 in the morning, while I was teaching the next morning, and making this, because it needed to be strong in a way that was really light, but was very strong. So the layering had to be, and going back to mathematics, done in 3 different phases, where there was never a line that would coincide with another line. And that would make the structure stronger. And just the last 2 weeks, when I had already, finished the main stuff, I hired 2 people to help me. And I paid that out of my salary. But to me also, it's not just a burden. It's not necessarily painful to do this myself, but it's part of the meaning of this museum, right? It's a community museum that's challenging the big system, or the big way in which we normally do things. So why not just do things by hand on one person, like what you can do as one single person, right? Well, it's never the work of one person. I needed help in the end as well to install it. Like 20 people came to help to install the work, right? So there's always more people involved, but the big bulk of this, I had to do on my own. Same with the bricks installation I did in this show I show in London, the image before. I also had to make most of the bricks myself. And I see this almost like a ritual, where I really have to make a sense or go through that process of, in that intense process of creation and production, to be really one with the piece, to feel connected with the piece, right? So some people may value that, or some people may not. For me, it's important when I can do it, right? If I cannot do it, I will hire someone definitely. And it's for different kind of work, all right? So, and the result is different as well. So it's something I have to be aware of from the beginning. Sorry, the questions are inviting for these very long answers. You like me to? I can answer really much shorter if you want, but they invite for this, So.
No,
Sorry,
I think it's great.
Excellent questions.
I'm fascinated with your work. My question, there isn't another one for me to read, so I'm just going to jump in. Do you miss, well, I know you do, but I guess, how are you handling missing doing, say, some of the performance pieces or the installations where you put yourself in? You can't really do that right now because we need to stay, separate from each other. But are you scheming about things that you can do, when we can finally kind of get out of this, quarantine time?
Well, yes. I mean, I have. If it's about the performance work,
Yeah.
I've done it on and off, really, and I have ideas that are really always in the back of my head for making projects as those. And yes, there are certain projects that cannot be accomplished. Like I have a project that involves working with sex workers.
Mm-hmm.
I have not been able to develop yet because one is illegal in the US. I could not do it there. In Europe, now that I'm here, I hope I can do it. I just applied for a grant to be able to do that. But also I'm aware that I will have to wait for this to end to be able to bring it up. And this is a project that actually dates back to 2007. Mm-hmm. It's something that the project I envisioned in 2007, but I've been worried about also the impact that work can have on me as a person. Because you know that when you walk into environments that can be charged, you are not free because we are human beings, right? And so I feel afraid as well about what kind of impact. But again, when you make a decision as an artist, there's no way back normally. You put yourself in situations that you would not sanely put yourself into often, right? And so that's a project, for instance, that I'm currently hope I will be able to develop. And then there's a project that I'm hoping it's going to happen in Japan that involves community. That I have submitted a proposal, and I think they liked it, but again, because of the pandemic, it's uncertain. But while I do those things, like the way I'm strategizing my work right now, which probably is the way that everyone is doing it now, is I'm planning things long term and immediate future as well, right? I have my studio work, which I'm really actively making now, taking advantage of the lockdown, no way. Which, I'm producing stuff that sometimes I had for years, and I'm trying just to go over, my sketches and see new ideas that come through that, and just go at it and work and finish them. And then I have these other long-term ideas that I know may not happen immediately because depend on the pandemic and the financial situation to improve. And but I still submit those things thinking, okay, maybe not now, maybe 2 years and 3 years.
Right.
So when that time comes, I already have something there, So I really think that after this passes, artists, we're going to have a lot of stuff happening. I really think that artists, we're going to be in a very good position. I think people will reassess the values of society in general and understand the importance that art can have. And I think that we have to resist and stay, in the positive mind state to make most of the time that we have now for when that time arrives. Be prepared. I'm talking like a preacher now.
I know. I was like, this is so hopeful. I'm starting to believe you a little bit.
Right. Yeah.
No, that's amazing. That's actually really good to hear that. Yeah. I know we're a little over time, which I am so cool with. Are there any last questions? I can read somebody sent a thank you. They said, thanks for this talk, Cesar. I've brought your work up to many undergrads I work with in Baltimore at MICA. It was really nice to see the other pieces from your body of work with the walls that bisect social and individual spaces. Thank you, VSC, for posting this in your newsletter. Cool.
Tell that person, please, to send regards to Jose Ruiz. He's a close friend of mine.
Oh, cool. Nice.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I don't hear.
Thank you for the comment. Very nice.
Yeah, it's very nice. Of course, we'll do. Oh, great. Christina's still on. Okay, great. Well, I just want to say thank you, Cesar. Is there anything you want to close with? Now that
I appreciate the opportunity.
Now that we're at church.
Yeah, I think I'm talking too much because of the isolation. I think maybe I miss talking to people. So thank you for your time, for your patience, and for the honor to talk to you today, and your excellent questions as well.
Yeah, super good. And I can't wait to get you here in person. I know that we're going to do that. So
I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks so much. It was awesome.
Thank you very much, Kathy. Very nice to see you. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Very much to see you too, Kristen.
Yes, it was wonderful, Cesar. Thank you. And I love the connection between the Vermont and the wood pieces.
Yeah.
I love that connection.
Yeah.
It's incredible the way that life evolves, and